Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the virtual program today, Courageous Self-Care, Nurturing Your Capacity, Your Career, and Your Self-Compassion with Dr. Emilie Socash. I'm Brittany Spillman, and I serve as the Carey Center Director of Community and Collegiate Programs. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank this year's Community and Collegiate Program sponsors who have pledged to support our efforts in providing meaningful programming for the nonprofit sector. Thank you to Auburn University Outreach, the Community Foundation of East Alabama, the United Way of Central Alabama, the River Region United Way, KPMG, Auburn University Outreach Office of Public Service, the Drummond Thorne Stooks Fund for Excellence, and a community service grant made possible by State Senator Randy Price and State Representative Joe Lovern. Emilie is the founder and CEO of the Nonprofit Help Center, which she founded in 2018 after working in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years. She holds a master's in nonprofit management and a doctoral degree in organizational and leadership psychology, and her doctoral dissertation focused on psychological factors related to donor behavior. In 2021, her company launched the Merit Nonprofit Professional Development Platform, an online capacity building system that is designed just for a nonprofit team, which now supports over 400 nonprofits and the thousands of people that work at them nationwide. She has published 2 books on personal mission statement development and works to use her words to improve the world. Emilie is an avid traveler, reader, and believer in the power of people to make great things happen. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Socash.
Thank you, Brittany. I'm going to have you introduce me to every speaking event that I did because you do such a lovely job of it. And thank you to all of those folks that you listed as sponsoring, supporting, and making today's time possible. And most importantly, thank you to everybody who has logged in right now. And I know that we'll get a couple more people logging in. There's always a few stragglers right at the end. And even if you're watching on the recording, we are happy that you're here. You know, I have some goals for you today, but I just want to share with you a little personal reflection as we're getting started. I have a number of topics that I speak on and that I facilitate and I run webinars on, but this one is my favorite one. And the reason that is because not only do I love this topic and I love this content, but this also is one of those, you all probably have this in some of your work as well. This is one that really fills my bucket as well. And it's a real shot in the arm. And so, Brittany, I'm counting on you to be, keeping an eye on the chat and really, helping me to kind of keep an eye on what folks are reflecting, because I do want this to be a reflective session. And also, everybody get ready to put your running shoes on because we are going to cover a lot of ground in this session. So everybody ready? If you're on video, give me a thumbs up. If you're not, that's okay. That's okay. Okay, cool. So our topic today, courageous self-care, nurturing your capacity, your career, and your self-compassion. Those are things I could speak on for an hour on each topic, but we're going to blend that right into a really high-powered, useful and usable set of thoughts today. So here is my goal for our time together today. So I really want to make sure that each of you is walking away with energy, with enthusiasm, with expanded hearts and minds. Now, you probably, when you signed up for this time together today, you probably thought that this would be a session. I would be giving you the keys to the kingdom. I would be helping you unlock the secret to self-care nirvana. And I am so sorry to disappoint. I want to manage your expectations, but that is not what we're here to do today. Rather, all of you are going to walk away having a better sense of how to really care for yourself, to really be compassionate with yourself, and to really build capacity in yourself for whatever you're facing today, and most importantly, whatever your tomorrow might look like. And so to do all of that, and to do it authentically, we really have to be pretty courageous to be imperfect. Now, one of my favorite quotes is coming up on the next slide, but let's give you just a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to do 3 chunks to our conversation today. We're going to talk about the origin story of self-care, like where did self-care come from? What is self-compassion? What is capacity? We're then going to look at some gaps and traps. All of us on this call, we have had at least a glancing blow of familiarity with gap analysis. We're going to take that and turn the lens on ourselves. And then we're going to do an activity I call future selving. If you've never heard of it, that's because I just made it up. So something that I wholeheartedly believe is that perfect is the enemy of good enough. This is not a quote that I made up. I saw it somewhere along the way and it really stuck. Unlocking productivity, unlocking effectiveness, happiness, well-being, it requires us to get comfortable and courageous with being imperfect. And this is where courage comes in. So courage can be defined as the quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty, danger, pain without fear. So as we explore self-care, self-compassion, capacity building, we're going to look at what it can and can't do in our lives. I want us all to embrace this courage in exploring what the right fit is for each of us. Not the perfect fit, but the good enough fit. And you'll be pleased to know we have 3 exercises that we're going to do today, 3 little activities. You can use a scratch pad, but I actually encourage you to use the notes function in your phone. So if you have your phone handy, just know, don't feel guilty about that. Like, that's okay. It's going to be part of your self-care exercise. So let's talk a little bit about origin story, basics of the basics of self-care, self-compassion, and maybe a better way to understanding both of these things. So I thought it might be kind of fun to share with you my own self-care routine, right? I'm this leadership psychologist, so technically I should have it figured out, right? So here's a little window into my morning. So at 5:05 a.m., I wake up naturally. I don't need an alarm. I've kind of trained myself because I have this really healthy bedtime routine the night before, because they say that a good bedtime routine is what makes for a good start to your day, right? And I start with some mindful movement. One of my favorite stretches is child's pose. It's a great morning thing, it's very grounding, because they say that if you really get close to the earth early in the day, you only can go up, right? And then one of my non-negotiables is 10 or 15 minutes of meditation, because they say that mindfulness and really getting into our own like head space and heart space, it really makes us so much more aware of all the potential for our day. I usually start my day with some hot water and lemon, because they say it's like so cleansing. So like I really feel like that's a good place to go. And that all takes about 25-30 minutes. And then at 5:35, I start by nourishing my body. Now I really take advantage of my household they're not early risers. So I have this time to myself. And this morning, I will admit, a little bit of a humble brag, I had some bread that I made myself with this like organic wheat. There's this like market near here because I love to shop local, right? And you know how there's like this 10-minute window when you can capture when an avocado is ripe. Like I got that this morning. It was so amazing. And I drizzled it with a little bit of this olive oil that I got from some friends we have out in California. And, they say that keeping those social connections as you get older is one of the critical aspects to aging healthfully. So I like to really prompt that. I do some gratitude anchoring, which really looks like reflecting on yesterday's gratitude journaling. And then I review my day's mission and mantra, because if I don't know what my mission is today, I'm just going to be a slave to my to-do list. I then at 5:55 start waking up my household. I have creature care. I have 2 dogs. I have a fish tank. I have a tortoise. I have a spouse. I have a couple kids. And I start doing some of those nurturing things. Like I kiss each of them on the forehead, even the dogs. Okay, time out. I want to know in the chat, at what point during everything that I just shared did you start to hate me? I see Anna Maria. I got a chuckle out of her, maybe even out of Shannon. Brittany laughed too. So feel free to drop in the chat. At what point, or come off of audio. At what point did you absolutely say, what is this woman talking about? Oh, Kristen, no. So wake up naturally, right? Jennifer was like, it was right at the beginning. Like I was out. Oh, Angie loves all of this. That's so good. That you wake up on purpose at 5:05 right now. Lies. It's all lies. It's all fiction. And so I share this with you because all of us are getting messages to take care of yourself, make yourself a priority, self-care. Like this is the number one thing that we all should be doing. And if we could just do it right, everything would be great. So that's all lies. So, my morning this morning, I did roll out of bed at like 7:15, but that was only because like things were noisy in my house. Have I ever baked my own bread? Maybe in the 90s. I do love avocados, and I was gifted a bottle of olive oil, but like when I look at it, I think of like, oh, that was from a friend who I have not kept in touch with. So self-care can be this. Oh, Felicia, me too. Felicia said that she stays up late just to get alone time every day. Same. No, there's no judgment on that. Kissing the dogs, that actually does happen, but it's throughout the day. So when we have such an emphasis on getting self-care right and creating these structures for ourselves, it really starts to lose its connection with what self-care actually can be and should be for us. So just know, none of that was true, except for I do love avocados. And I do have like all those creatures in my home. And it is a little bit like fend for yourself in the mornings. So let's talk about, let's get over here to what self-care really is, the good side, and then maybe the not so good side. So you know how some things in our world get a bad rap? So I think that self-care often gets too good of a rap. I would argue that we are fed this steady diet of, if you would just drink more water, get more sleep, write more in your gratitude journal, then you will really be your best self. Blech. That is not the road to being our best self. But first, let's dig into some of the core basics of what self-care is. So at its core, self-care is the act of consciously tending to our own well-being. It has been around for thousands of years. So the next time that you take a bubble bath and you like throw back a glass of bubbly, don't think that you're doing anything new, because self-care has been around for a long, long time. Now, ages ago, let's go back maybe 150 years, self-care started to be understood and documented as a practice that was specifically for those who were in emotionally daunting jobs. Think battlefield medic. That's where we're going with these origins, right? Historically, self-care was talked about as something that needed to be done before they could go out and care for others. They needed to show up for themselves before they could care for others. Then during the time, let's go back 75 years or so, mid-century last century, during the time of women's liberation, civil rights, self-care started to be documented as something that was encompassing of mental and physical health. Think about it this way. There was an emphasis of wanting to have control over our own individual health and healthcare. Think access to medical care, think access to birth control. Those are two of the highlights. So for a great long while, self-care in the middle of the last century was actually a political act. It was a focus on personal agency over our healthcare decisions. So mind blown, right? Now, concurrently, at that same time, we started to see these rumblings around the fashions and trends of wellness that became popular in the 70s and 80s. So we saw some interesting language start to pop up. I was in elementary school in the 80s, and I remember the concept of positive health being introduced. That it wasn't just the absence of illness that made one healthy, but it was actual positive health markers and positive health attributes. And then this is a fun fact. In 1979, on the television show 60 Minutes, that was the first time on television that the word wellness was used. And Dan Rather said, wellness, that's a word you don't hear every day. And then he later went on to say, as I understand it, it is really the ultimate in something that we're calling self-care. So what we're talking about is it's not something that we should be taking for granted. This is actually a fairly new concept. Now, at that point, in the 80s, self-care diverged from politics, and we saw this unification within wellness. We saw fringe sorts of things like yoga, aerobics, nutrition enter the mainstream. They started to be things that people, normal people, everyday people were doing themselves. If you want a fun read on the history of these sorts of wellness activities, I recommend the book Butts, A Backstory. Now, in the early 2000s, we started to see that self-care encompassed a wellness in the mind-body space, and it was still reactionary because what was going on in the 2000s? We started the decade with 9/11. We ended the decade with a tremendous economic recession. And we saw a greater shift towards we want to really look at self-care as this mind-body way to comfort ourselves. And then in 2016, we may have had some political things going on that were distracting the nation. And interestingly, Google searches for the term self-care doubled in 2016 over the searches for the same term in 2015. And it has continued to increase each year in response to things that are going on in the world. So when we think of self-care, it's bigger than ourselves. So as a community, in the last 8 years or so, we continue to find stressors and challenges around every corner, including within our own nonprofits. And then we often think self-care is the thing that is going to get us through. So here's the thing. Self-care isn't the thing. It is a thing, but it is not the thing. When we rely on self-care to be the thing, we start to see the not so good potential that self-care has. So when we're pursuing the perfect in self-care, we might start getting lots of sleep. We might start eating a healthy diet. Those are great. I support those things. We might be meeting with a life coach. We might be meditating 30 minutes a day, getting plenty of exercise. But with all of the emphasis on the self, we might miss out on a crucial and more important aspect of well-being, which is our social connection. So I'm going to blow your mind right now. I'm going to share with you a study that was done a couple years ago with UCLA and the Yale School of Medicine. So the title of the research project was called Pro-Social Behavior Helps Mitigate the Negative Effects of Stress in Everyday Life. Fairly boring title, but what they found was that participants who engaged in other focused behavior, like holding open a door for somebody, lending a hand to somebody that needed it, they reported better moods and lower daily stress levels than those people who did not do those things, even when those people had really good self-care practices. So when I think about self-care in its like best form, I think it's really figuring out what works for you, honoring what your needs are, and working within your own limitations. And self-care has to be pursued in balance with self-compassion. So the word compassion means to suffer with in a shared human experience. And so self-compassion is being compassionate with ourselves. It's where we give ourselves space to share in our own suffering. Now, it's about acknowledging that what you feel, whether it's hurt or nervous or embarrassed, that all of those are part of the universal human experience. You might feel guilt or shame or embarrassment about something you did in the past. Being self-compassionate allows you to acknowledge that everyone has experiences like that. So when we turn that self-compassion on ourselves, we can recognize our own suffering or our own negative emotions, and we can start to see that part of the human experience is flubbing up. It's not getting things perfect. It's feeling all the feels. And to be compassionate with ourselves requires us to be courageous, because we're not going to get self-care perfect. Like, we're not going to have that morning that I just described. And if you do, please like write me an email, and I don't know, I'll give you an award, because it's just impossible, right? So when we are self-compassionate, we recognize that being imperfect, failing, experiencing life's difficulties. It's inevitable. And so we tend to be gentle with ourselves, even when we're having painful experiences, rather than getting angry. And here's the bottom line. When we are self-compassionate, we are able to recognize that we are not unique in our own suffering. I'm going to repeat that one more time. When we are self-compassionate, we are able to recognize that we are not unique in our own suffering. So we're able to take our anxious feelings when we're feeling like we're not making good progress towards a goal, and we're able to move forward together with those anxious feelings in a way that cares for the self. We do some self-care things. So self-compassion helps us figure out what works for us, what our needs are, and how we can work within our limitations. So compassion really bridges the ideal and the real. So the ideal is when we're not experiencing failure, frustration, disappointment, and all of the normal parts of our day. It bridges that ideal with the real, and understanding that in the real world, we miss a deadline. We have a wonky chat with our boss or our life partner. It's how we somehow go without doing one 10-minute self-care task for 11 days in a row, even though we committed to just taking 10 minutes to do it. I know I'm guilty of that all the time. So in these instances, compassion is what builds the bridge to help us continue to pursue future success around self-care, even if we have to redefine it as we go. So manifesto 1, we have 3 manifestos today. Here's our first one. We can use self-compassion to define who we want to be. So we're going to take the act of self-care, in which we refine and focus through the use of self-compassion to create a definition of who we want to be. One of the challenges with self-care as a movement is that it can get us into this infinite loop of behaviors. We end up focusing on the doing to care for ourselves, and we lose sight of who we actually want to be. All of us in this room are aware of staying in touch with the why of our nonprofit's mission, right? Like our why. We want kids to be able to read. We want older adults to be able to independently live in their homes. We want people to have a peaceful community that's green and that animals are healthy. All the whys. When we want to think about ourselves as people and as professionals, it's just as important to focus on our personal why. Who do we want to be? So when we layer self-care with self-compassion, that's where that magic really comes together. So first activity, get out a little scratch pad, your notes app in your phone. I like the notes app in the phone because you're going to be looking at your phone for like every minute of the rest of today ad nauseum into infinity. And so if you capture this and you think back positively about our time together, I think that that's a win. So here's what we want to do. And note this activity, I will ask if you want to share, you can share in the chat. So I'd like you to list 3 adjectives that you would like to live. Reminder from Emily, the English major, an adjective is an attribute word. It's like humble, patient, authentic. It's used to describe a noun. Don't worry about the noun part of things now, but it's loving, magnetic, inspirational. So take a few minutes, put them in your notes or on a scratch pad. And then if you feel comfortable, share in the chat what some of those things are. And you don't have to get them perfect, because I'm not going to follow up with you in a week to say, how is it being a patient person? This is just for the exercise. Kathy is saying, give grace. She wants to embrace grace. So as you're doing this, kind, loving, patient. I feel like I really plugged patient there. Patient is always good. It really is. when applied correctly. So what do we make from this? Keep dropping your words in the chat. I'm like looking over here at my other screen. Is it easy to be patient? Is it easy to be honest? No, it is not. Not at all times. In certain times it is. But we'll fall short on those things. We're currently falling short on all of those things. That is the nature of the human experience. Yet, when we are self-compassionate, we're able to say, okay, I'm not always a patient parent or an inspirational leader. What can I do to comfort myself? But what can I do to also make it better, to do better in that regard? So we're going to go deep as we go into our next exercises in a little bit to really think more about these adjectives on what do I need? What are my limitations? How can I really be this? I see we also have fun, spontaneous, authentic, compassionate. That's a good one. Integrity, happy. Yes, 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 yes. 1,000 times yes. These are all great. So keep those kind of present of mind as we look for some of our gaps. So we're going to take 3 little bites of thinking on this. We're going to talk about our be-do gaps. We're going to look at our personal capacity, and then this kind of a concept called be-do having. Not my idea, but it's something that I hope will help us unpack this a little deeper. Capacity happens to be my favorite topic, and you'll see why in a moment. So to be, what does this tiny word mean? This is the smallest verb in the English language, and I think it's best described or defined using an example. So let's say we ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid will say, I want to be an artist. Fair. And you might hear from that child what their day will include while they are being an artist. They'll say that they're going to paint, they're going to stretch their canvases, they're going to go outside for inspiration, they're going to mix colors, right? They're going to do all those things to be an artist. So let's now frame our model around this simple child artist version. So if you want to be inspirational, let's say inspirational is what you want to be, that means that you're going to spend your days inspiring others. You're going to work on your abilities to inspire. Maybe you're going to ensure that you're making eye contact and doing lots of positive gestures and positive body language, because that can be inspirational to some. Maybe you are checking on your direct reports and giving them encouraging words. Maybe you're really filling your own bucket and thinking about your own vision. All of that activity those are things that you would do if you were wanting to be inspirational. Now, if you wanted to be inspirational and you're doing all these actions, what will you have at the end of the day? You might have respect. You might have the admiration of your team. You might have a deeper, committed team. You might have a fulfilled vision. But we all know it's not that simple to just say, I'm going to be inspirational. I'm going to do inspirational things. And my colleagues and my team, they're going to respect me and admire me. It's just not quite that simple. That's where our personal capacity comes in. And so capacity, it's a word in my business. I say it like 1,000 times a day, because when I'm working with nonprofit teams, nonprofit professionals, we're often talking about capacity as bandwidth, ability, competency, right? And when we think about it on an individual level, it's very similar. I think about it kind of quantitatively and qualitatively. So quantitatively, capacity, our personal capacity, those are our countable things, like hours in the day, kind of like a measure of our own energy. Could be our dollars in the bank. It could be dollars we've raised. Countable things related to our personal capacity. Our qualitative capacity, these are more of our squishy resources. This is where our mindset comes in, our attitude, our ability to be self-compassionate, a little bit of our ability to practice self-care. And so our capacity is really our ability to think about how we're doing what we're doing. So when we're talking about capacity, That is what we're talking about. It's the how you're doing what you're doing. So if you want to build up your capacity to be inspirational, then we get into what are the skills that you need? What are the mindsets that are surrounding that particular be? Similarly, to be, Charlotte said, resilient. To be resilient, to build up your capacity for resilience, we're going to look at the skills, the competencies, the mindsets, the practices around that. It's all about building up how you're doing the thing that you want to be. And if you can't tell, this is something I have a ton of energy for, because I really do believe, like Brittany said in my introduction, that I believe in the power of people to do amazing things and to make great things happen. And this is where it all comes together. So let's talk about these traps, though. So you may find some familiarity in this domain, and keep in mind that this part, I just want to do a little bit of a plug just to get your wheels turning. Our session today is an hour long, and this is the hour-long version of a longer team-focused version of this workshop that I do. I love working with teams, the entire staff of a nonprofit, particularly because of some of these exercises. And so let this get your wheels turning. And if you want to have a team building exercise, just reach out to me. The be, do, having trap. We see this come up at the individual and the team level. And it might feel a little bit prickly. So just be gentle on yourself right now. Here is something that I hear from individuals a fair bit. So let's say that the word that one of your adjectives was respected. I want to be respected. Okay, that's cool. So you're feeling that personally and professionally, it'd be really meaningful for you to be respected in all the different ways that this shows up at home, at work, in the community. You want to be respected. So you think, well, if I attend a webinar with Emilie at the Nonprofit Help Center, then I'll have more knowledge and I can finally be respected. Or if I build up my knowledge by reading 2 journal articles every week, I will have more knowledge. I can take on more responsibility in my workplace, and then I'll finally be more respected. This can come up at the team level too. Like, for example, if we send out this year-end appeal, then we'll have enough money to expand our program, and we'll finally be able to impact that one particular segment of our population and be impactful. Or if we have a 10% increase in this year's budget, then we can expand our program and we can finally be impactful in that one part of our target population. You'll notice that there are 3 components that each of these scenarios describes. We want to really settle on be, do, have. I want to be inspirational. I want to do inspirational things, and I want to have the results of being inspirational. Each of those that I described just now, it's where we put the doing first, then the having, and then the being. So Anna Marie, one of hers was compassionate. So if she were doing the compassionate activities to have the outcomes of compassion, then she would finally be compassionate. It's backwards. It's putting the engine at the end of the train. Now, I'm going to give you a personal example because I think that, that this will probably paint the picture. So if we have, let me see where my example is. Now I'm just going to go back. I'm going to do the example. So for example, as I am moving my way through my 40s, one of the B's that I want to do is I want to be active. And I think a lot of us probably share that. So one of the traps that I could feel, rather than focusing on being active, doing active things, and then having all of the wonderful benefits like cardio health and a healthy weight and a really good mindset, right? If I were to say, well, if I join a gym, then I'll have a gym membership and I can finally be active. I'm missing some of the steps. Okay, so let's turn to our second manifesto. Courageous self-care calls us to capture our capacity in the be, do, have ideal. So let's look at these gaps and traps together. I want you to think about, we're going to take 60 seconds and do this. And this one is optional share. If you want to share, please do. If you don't, that's okay too. I would like to look at where are you trapped and where are your gaps. So if you were, for example, Shannon said energetic, calm, and integrity. So think about how you're thinking about those aspects. So if Shannon thought, and Shannon, I'm sorry to pick on you. If Shannon thought, well, I want to be energetic. But if she's thinking, okay, to be energetic, I have to do these things first. I have to have this membership. I have to have this certain scenario. Then I can finally be energetic or be one that has integrity or be calm. So think for yourself for just maybe 30 more seconds. Where might you or your organization be falling into some of these do, have, be, or have, do, be traps? And it's a little bit of a stumper, but do think about it and keep the comments flowing. Now, I'm going to go back to my active example. So I might think I will walk 10,000 steps per day and I will have good cardio fitness. Then I can be an active adult. The challenge with that is that I am externalizing. I'm hinging the entire identity of being an active adult on doing one type of activity. It's very limiting, and it also puts a lot at risk. If I really want to live as an active adult, I need to let all of my activities fall from there. So keep thinking on that, and I'm going to share with you the bigger picture of why we think about our actions. Our actions show our expectations, all of those doings, whether it's walking 10,000 steps or going to a Zumba class, or whether it is doing meditation so that we are compassionate and calm. Those are the doings that all support the being. Okay, so let's turn to, we're going to open our minds to making a relationship with our future self. How many of you have a favorite life hack? Because this is my favorite life hack anytime I'm feeling stuck and I feel like I need to really recenter and do a little bit of self-care. If you have a life hack that you think is like amazing, I encourage you to drop it in the chat. A lot of life hacks seem to embrace the idea of like doing something the night before, which like laying out your gym clothes or packing your lunch or meal prepping. You can tell I'm very much in like a fitness frame of mind right now. But any of those life hacks, this will become your self-care life hack. So let's talk a little bit about the self, the story we're telling ourselves, and then I am going to give you a little secret to activate around. So first, the self. If any of you have done anything with psychology, like you took an online class, or maybe you took Psychology 101 way back when you were in college, social identity theory may sound a little bit familiar, and there will not be a test on this. And you can also have a differing opinion on this. But think about social identity theory as one way to understand our identities. We have many identities that we all hold. It could be community member, it could be parent, it could be neighbor, any of those things. Social identity theory is a concept that it basically says that we only exist in relationship to others. Our identity can be understood through the lens of that space that exists between ourselves and others. So for example, we all have the identity of child to our parents. We all might be parents ourselves, but you can only be a parent with a child. We might be a sibling, which requires a brother or a sister. We might be an employee, which requires an employer. See these relationships, these little spokes that come off of ourselves. We might be a boss. We might be a donor. We might be a neighbor. All of these require somebody else for us to actually hold that identity. It's not the only theory surrounding identity, but it is useful in thinking about this self-care secret that I'm going to share. So I would also argue that we can think of our future self as one of those relationships, those critical connections, which we manage that speak to who we are and how we care for ourselves. So there's Emilie that's here today speaking with you. And then there's Emilie of tomorrow and all of the distant future tomorrows that I know is a different and distant person from myself. This is effective both personally and professionally. I can think about the friend that I want to be tomorrow. I can think about the professional that I want to aspire to be, or simply the leader or the accomplished nonprofit professional where I'm going. Social identity theory is all about understanding ourselves in relationship to others. And I would argue that one of those others should be our future self. So how do we get to know our future self? It might feel a little bit wonky. We will use some of those courageous self-care skills. We will use the process of reflective, self-compassionate processes. We want to build up our capacity. What do those practices look like? So to get to know your future self, here are some of the things that the folks that I coach have used that I see as having good traction. Journaling, telling a story about what's to come. Vision boards, yes, they work. They help us put down on paper what we want to see in our future, or bringing that tomorrow you into the conversation, which sounds a lot like talking to yourself. But here, think about it this way. How many of you, time for true confessions, how many of you in this room had an imaginary friend as a child? I know some did. I know I did. I had 3, but that's a story for another day. But if as a child, we could imagine and envision a completely different person who had interests, who had different looks, who had mannerisms other than us, we can certainly imagine ourselves as another adult into the future. Now, how does that come into play with this story aspect? So many of us on this call are very adept at telling the story of our nonprofit's mission, telling the story of one, telling the story of our impact. I want to leverage those skills into telling the story of our future self. And this is Shannon did not, Kristen did not, I'm sorry. Maybe I was the only one that had an imaginary friend. When we tell the story of our future self, this helps us to really care for the self of today. So we all do have an internal narrative that we're constantly crafting. Sometimes we call that our inner voice. Sometimes we call it self-talk. A way to really harness in a positive means and also to understand where we might be going a little bit negative is a technique. I think that Brene Brown created it. It goes like this. The story I'm telling myself is. So this technique can be used in the instance when you're having a troubled time with people close to you. Maybe your spouse didn't change over the laundry from the washer. Maybe one of your colleagues is giving you advice when you really just wanted to vent. And this is how you use this magical phrase. The story I'm telling myself is. So it goes something like this. The story I'm telling myself is that if you don't keep your promises on small things like laundry, you might not keep your promises on big things like me. Or it could be the story I'm telling myself is that you think I'm an idiot and I don't know how to solve my own program's problems. I just wanted to vent. So the great thing about this phrase is that it acknowledges that we might have it wrong. We likely have it wrong, but yet we are feeling it anyways. And it helps us put shape to what we're sensing, what we're feeling, what we're perceiving at any given moment. But we can use this with our future self as a means of self-care to invite them into the conversation. It might sound something like this. The story I'm telling myself is that there's not enough time today to exercise. The story I'm telling myself is that I'm not ready for that next promotion. The story I'm telling myself is that I'm not worthy of respect because I can't seem to keep my temper in check. So inherent to each of these fictional stories is one of those be, have, do traps, because we're thinking externally about who is really in control of who we want to be. And we end up shoulding on yourself. Like, I should really exercise every day. I should really keep my temper in check. I should really do more FaceTime with my donors so that I can get that next opportunity. So the secret to bringing all of this together is to really harness our self-talk to work for us and not against us. The stories that we tell ourselves are the ones that we listen to when nobody else is listening. So this is where we get to unlock our self-care secrets. So there's this thought that when we say something, we hear it. And when we hear it, we believe it. When we believe it, we act on it. When we act on it, we expect it. And what we expect, we become. So there's this little daisy chain of going from hearing to believing, believing to acting, acting to expecting, and expecting to becoming. And that's why that self-talk, that story that we tell ourselves, becomes the roadmap for hacking our future, to really link self-talk as a self-care action all the way through to who we want to become. So, manifesto number 3, the stories we tell ourselves become our future. Now, this is, actually, I have one more thing to say about this. There is a quote that is attributed to Henry Ford. It could be him, it could be somebody else. It goes something like this. Tell me if you've heard it. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. So if I believe that I can't seem to get my act together with self-care, I will be right. If I tell myself that I can't get traction on this one particular donor initiative, then I'm right. If I say this is as good as it gets, then I am right. Alternatively, though, and here's the self-care secret. If I tell myself, I am looking forward to seeing wild success, or I know that I'm becoming an active adult, or I believe that I will be getting that promotion next year, then I am right. So we're going to do a final activity. This is activity number 3, and this is a quiet personal activity, but we're going to do something fun with your hands. So we're going to contemplate 3 questions, and these are just personal and private to you. What is your next professional step? Where can you build capacity in your future self? And what does courageous self-care look like to make this happen? Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think to yourselves. I know you're all already on mute, so nobody will hear you when you say this. But we're going to be doing this little thing that I like to, I don't know, it's a little physics experiment. It's a little bit about acoustics. So you're going to take your hands and you're going to bring together your pinky side of your hands. And then we're just going to cup them so that it's open on this side, but closed on this side. And you're making a little clamshell, like an amphitheater in your hands. And I want you to think in your head, what is your next professional step? And then you're going to say it softly into your hands. Now, I know it feels goofy, but I'm going to do it right here. And I'm hoping that you will all choose to do it too. So take 10 seconds and say what your next professional move is. Okay, so we do this because if you noticed, when you whisper it or you say it softly, it sounds kind of loud. It sounds very clear in your ears because that sound throws right back. I couldn't hear it. Brittany couldn't hear it. Probably the people across the office, they can't hear it, but we are hearing it because we're going to believe it. We're going to believe it to act on it, and act on it to expect it. And when we expect it, that's what we become. Now, I have one more before we turn to any questions that we want to do. I have one more movement activity for us. Now, if you want to stand, you can. I happen to be standing. It doesn't require standing. You can stay seated. But what we're going to do, we're going to hold up a hand. It doesn't matter which hand. Hold up one hand. And I want to think back to your favorite adjective that you came up with earlier. So I've been using the word active, like active adulthood or whatever we want to call it, activity. And I want you to touch your thumb to your pinky and That's the time when you're going to think that word or say that word. And then the next three, you're going to touch the next three, begins with me. So in my case, I can say an active life. So an active life begins with me. And I want you to do that at least one time through and just think it each time. This is actually a yoga practice that helps us center to remind us that all of these adjectives, all of these ways that we want to be, not do, but be, that they all begin with ourselves. And it's actually a fun thing that you can do the next time you're in a meeting and you're stressed out. You can do this under the table, and it's a nice centering exercise. So please think on this as you're thinking of any questions or conversation that you want to have in the chat. I will, I can, I must. Here in all of our work within the nonprofit sector, we will show up. We can show up. We must show up for ourselves and for others, whether that be through self-care, courageous self-compassion, building our own capacity, and really showing up. I thank you all for showing up today and spending this time with Brittany and I and the Carey Center and all of these great supporters. I now would welcome comments, curiosities, conversation that you want to have over on the chat, or you can even come off of mute, whatever you're comfortable with. And Brittany, I would turn it over to you for any closing words as folks are thinking of anything that they want to share on the chat.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and say my closing comments while y'all are thinking of your questions. Dr. Socash, thank you so much for a wonderful program today. Everyone, you will be getting an email from me with a link to today's presentation and recording and an opportunity to sign up to be a Carey Center nonprofit affiliate. The Carey Center Nonprofit Affiliate Program currently serves over 325 nonprofits in Alabama and beyond, and offers educational programming, professional development, and networking opportunities to nonprofit professionals. Carey Center nonprofit affiliates are the first to learn about upcoming programming, and membership is free. We are excited to announce that we have partnered with Dr. Socash and are now offering the Carey Center Nonprofit Professional Certificate. This is an online, non-degreed certificate and offered through a partnership with the Auburn University Office of Professional and Continuing Education and Merit Nonprofit Professional Development, and provides a tailored curriculum for nonprofit professionals. Merit is an anytime, anywhere micro-learning platform that builds 6 core nonprofit proficiency areas, including leading, learning, resource generating, planning, managing, and overseeing through 28 learning paths. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at one of our monthly virtual programs or in person for our nonprofit training series that is traveling the state. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Socash?
I'm dropping in the chat my website where you can find all of the info about everything that Brittany just mentioned, as well as how to reach me, info about our board course, info about the certificate that Brittany just mentioned, all the good stuff. It's right there. And it'll also be on the slide deck that Brittany shares out. Excellent. Well, I hope that all of you are able to take the next 7 minutes and do a little bit of self-care, a little bit of telling yourself some amazing stories about how the rest of your day, the rest of your week, the rest of your month is going to be amazing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Socash. I hope you all have a great day.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone.